Hello and welcome to this latest presentation by the London Transport Museum Friends. In putting together our programme of recorded talks, we're aiming to strike a sensible balance between contemporary issues and more historical topics. And for this presentation, we're going back in time. Our speaker is Roger Torode, who has had a distinguished career with London Transport in bus operations, innovative ticketing and in other fields. And in retirement, he's authored a number of books, including the definitive story of the privatisation of London's buses and also books on Midland Red. Roger has lived in London for most of his life and has strong family connections going back through the generations. Roger's talk is entitled My Corner of London, and that corner is what we now know as the London Borough of Waltham Forest, embracing the longer established names of Chingford, Leyton and Walthamstow. Before I hand over to Roger, can I say that if you are watching this talk live at its premiere, you'll be able to engage with Roger using the chat function. If you're watching at a later time, then please leave a comment because we do welcome your feedback. Roger, over to you.
Thank you, Barry, and hello to you all. Perhaps I should explain that I grew up in Worcestershire in the Midland Red area, but my father came from London and we regularly visited his parents in Barnet. I moved to London when I was 20 and have been here ever since, living in the Waltham Forest area for almost 50 years now. The first home we bought was a flat in Leyton, which coincidentally was where my great-grandparents settled around 1880, having a large Victorian family with 8 sons and 2 daughters, and our name was still remembered as a result of a motor garage that 2 of those sons, my great-uncles, had on Leyton High Road, and I will mention that later on. If you look back at old pictures of your local area, you find a number of locations that have been regularly photographed over the years, and you can see the developments in those places through the pictures. So what I offer here is a series of photographs of this part of London showing the changes over 120 years and the part that public transport played in those changes. I've called it My Corner of London, thinking that some of you watching may think I could do that, which I encourage you to do, and perhaps we will have more talks by members describing the history of the local area. I will be talking about the area of Waltham Forest immediately to the east of the River Lee, which is London's second river after the Thames. This is historically the southwest corner of Essex and right next to London, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of this map from 1601. There is evidence that the River Lee was used for transport as early as the Bronze Age, 750 BC and earlier. There is also evidence of settlements here in Roman times in the Wood Street area, defensive settlements on stilts on the floodplain of the river in the early Middle Ages when Vikings came on raids down the river, and through the later Middle Ages, developing around Walthamstow village, Higham Hill and Wood Street. The Epping Road followed the ridge on the high ground through Woodford to the east. The land falls gradually west from that ridge down to the floodplain of the river. It remained fairly rural for a lot longer than other areas around London because it was sandwiched between the forest and the River Lee and was not itself on a main road out of London. By the early 1800s, there was the beginning of development with large houses around Walthamstow. It was a place where wealthy men from the city liked to build their homes with views across the Lee Valley and fresh air. Stagecoaches came through the area from Newmarket and Bishop Stortford. Here is one at Chigwell, and this was an area where Dick Turpin operated, of course. Long before the railway, there was a stagecoach service from Walthamstow into London. Originally, in the early 18th century, this ran down Hoe Street and through Leyton to Stratford, where it joined the main road from East Anglia, crossed the River Lee at Bow Bridge, and continued to Mile End, Aldgate and the City of London. Then, around 1745, the Lee Bridge was built, with a turnpike road to it from Whip's Cross, which became the Lee Bridge Road and gave a more direct route to London through Clapton. This service was bought by Francis Ragg of Walthamstow in 1759 and was run by his family for 4 generations, with coaches to the city 7 times a day until 1870. They had their stables in Wood Street. It was a service for gentlemen with daily business in the city, and there are written recollections of it, recorded in the 1920s, when an elderly man talked of when he was a boy, watching from the first floor of his home in Wood Street each morning as the stagecoach approached, the guard sounding his horn, and his father would turn and wave before getting on board. There were attempts to mechanise transport, and in 1833, Walter Hancock of Stratford in East London designed and constructed the Enterprise steam bus. There was a replica of this running at Acton Depot a couple of years ago. He also built the Automaton, which a local historian tells us was tried on the Epping Road in 1836. So maybe it ran along the Woodford New Road, which had been built in 1829. But it wasn't popular with other road users, and from incidents like this came the expression, "Don't scare the horses." Also in 1829, George Shillibeer introduced his omnibus between Paddington and the Bank. We must remember that bus services started in London before the railways. They sprang up all around London, recorded by artists at the time. James Pollard did several paintings of the Clapton omnibus, these in 1852. This was one of the longer routes that linked Clapton at the Lea Bridge Road to the Bank. The first passenger railway in London was between London and Greenwich in 1836. The first railway here was the Eastern Counties Railway, which opened a station at Lea Bridge on the east side of the river in 1840 on the line to Cambridge. The local stagecoach operators then started services to this station from Walthamstow to meet the trains. But interestingly, some of the city commuters preferred the stage carriage from nearer their homes and clubbed together to guarantee the income of Mr. Ragg if he continued the service, which he did, a sort of season ticket, I suppose. In 1870, trains came to Walthamstow, initially via Stratford and the Hall Farm Curve. In 1873, Liverpool Street Station was opened in place of Bishopsgate, and also the line extended to Hynes Park and Chingford. The building of Liverpool Street Station resulted in the demolition of a large area of poor housing, and as a result, the railway was required to provide cheap workmen's fares. The Great Eastern did this on the inner sections of their services, and this led to the marked difference in the size and density of houses out as far as Leyton and Leytonstone, for example, compared to Woodford and beyond. House building started in earnest around each of the stations, and Walthamstow grew rapidly. But in the words of the musical song, it was true that, with a pair of opera glasses, you could see to Hackney Marshes if it wasn't for the houses in between. On the way to Chingford, the railway crossed a country lane called Wadham Road at this crossing. Wadham Road later became the North Circular Road and now is a hectic dual carriageway in a deep cutting passing under the railway line at this point. Chingford was still very rural, and the railway encouraged new interest in the forest. In 1878, the original small station near the village green was replaced by a larger station on the edge of the forest to attract visitors and to stimulate suburban growth. The line was doubled and the new station built as a through station with its platform and tracks leading out onto an embankment ready to cross the road and enter the forest. In 1882, Queen Victoria came by train to Chingford and declared the forest open to the public forever. The railway was now stumped. There would be no new development on the forest land, but land to the south of the station was developed with large villas. The Royal Forest Hotel was also built in the 1880s, and these drawings were produced then showing the delights of the forest to visitors. Anyone who has gone from Chingford Station to the Royal Forest Hotel will recognise this scene, though the picture is 140 years old. In 1894, Hale End Station was renamed Hynes Park to persuade people to go to see the most beautiful lake within a day's travel of London, which had been landscaped by Humphrey Repton and was a short walk from the station. On the roads, the London bus services expanded rapidly in the late 1800s, and the buses developed with seats on top. The London General Omnibus Company, LGOC, was founded in 1856 and quickly became dominant. This garden seat horse bus is on service from the Elephant and Castle to Clapton, successor to the Clapton bus from the Bank that I showed a few moments ago. It shows a link to Leyton on the board under the windows. Horse trams also began to be introduced, and this is a North Metropolitan horse tram on Leytonstone High Road, a service which started in 1874, and this sort of scene was becoming familiar across London. In 1883, a horse tramway using small single-deckers started from Clapton along the Lea Bridge Road to Leyton and to the Rising Sun at Whip's Cross, but it was under-resourced and did not survive long. It had few passengers in the week, and the small trams couldn't cope with the numbers of people wanting to travel to the forest at weekends. So in 1888, a new company, the Lea Bridge, Leyton and Walthamstow Tramways Company, was formed to run the tramway. Starting in 1889, it ran from the Lea Bridge just down the road from Clapton. It ran via the Baker's Arms, where there was a branch to Leyton Station from 1890 that you can see turning to the right in this picture. They had wanted to build northwards to Hoe Street Station, the road to the left, but Walthamstow Council was not cooperative, wanting the tramway company to pay for road widening, which involved demolition of some buildings. The tram continued to the Rising Sun on the edge of the forest. This was very popular at weekends and holidays, carrying large numbers of passengers. This very old picture is just down the road from the Rising Sun towards the Whip's Cross, near the end of the line, and trams often turned here during the week. And interestingly, I can show a modern comparison taken more recently. Compare the tree on the right and the large bush on the left and the long roof of Forest School in the background. These trams were also very popular when the River Lea flooded, which it did regularly until a flood relief channel was built in 1948. The only way of going across there without getting your feet wet would be on the tram. The company also introduced horse buses to Walthamstow and to Stratford to extend the reach of their services. This one ran up Hoe Street, past the railway station, and then down the High Street to Black Horse Road and Higham Hill. The fares were a penny and twopence. Perhaps the real reason that Walthamstow had resisted the extension of the horse trams along Hoe Street was because the Urban District Council was planning their own electric tram service, and this was introduced on the 3rd of June 1905. Here is the depot building, which is still there and a locally listed building, although it now contains flats. The site later became Walthamstow Trolleybus and then Bus Carriage, but sadly closed in the early 1990s. For a time, that was my office at the top right-hand window. Walthamstow trams were opened with a grand parade along the routes, with decorated trams and everyone dressed in all their finery for a very special occasion, a time of real civic pride and investment in local facilities. There was a route from Chingford Mount via Walthamstow to the Baker's Arms, seen here in Hoe Street. Another north-south route ran from Higham Hill down to the Lea Bridge Road at Markhouse Road, and this picture shows one of those trams with St James Street Station on the Chingford line behind. There was also an east-west route, which started at the narrow wooden bridge at the Ferry boat inn by the River Lea on the boundary with Tottenham, and it ran past Black Horse Road, seen here. And it continued along Forest Road to the Bell Corner, where it crossed the Chingford route, and the depot was down the hill behind those two trams. It continued along Forest Road, climbed up to the ridge at Woodford, past Wood Street to the Waterworks Corner, seen here. And at that point, it turned northeast along the Woodford New Road, which was developing leisure traffic with cyclists into the forest. And it terminated at the Napier Arms on the boundary with Woodford. Woodford rejected the line running on from the Napier Arms to Woodford Green. They didn't want trams in their village. And this became a very popular route for people right across Walthamstow for excursions into the forest, with the Napier Arms at the top of Oak Hill as the terminus. The building is still there, now a very good restaurant. There was a dog leg of a route from the Napier Arms to meet the Leyton cars at the Rising Sun. There were barely any buildings along the route, which soon ran just at weekends and holidays. Here is the Walthamstow electric tram meeting the Leyton horse tram. These tracks remained separate until the track was relayed in 1931. And here is the Walthamstow overhead tower wagon, horse-drawn at the Crooked Billet. The pub was rebuilt and remained for many years as this became a major junction on the North Circular Road, but now it is a huge roundabout and underpass. This is also roughly the spot where the Walthamstow tram chase took place in 1909. Two anarchists attempted a wages snatch in Tottenham, fled across the marshes and hijacked a Walthamstow tram. They were then pursued through Walthamstow by police who had commandeered another tram. But this is still another story which I have told before and must await a further occasion. Leyton opened its electric tram system on the 1st of December 1906. They took over the horse trams in their area in 1905-06 and set about converting them to electric trams. Here is their launch at the Baker's Arms. Their depot was just down the road from here. Their trams were to the latest design with the luxury of roofs on the upper deck. Their routes were between Clapton, the Baker's Arms, the Rising Sun, Leytonstone, Bow Bridge and Wanstead Flats. There was a new link from Leyton Station to the Hatched House on Leytonstone High Road. Two of their routes were worked jointly with West Ham Council, and in this picture at Leyton Station, a Leyton tram is coming towards us, followed by a West Ham car, which is passing a southbound Leyton car on the bridge. There was also a new link along Whipps Cross Road beside the edge of the forest, and this again was very popular with people travelling there all the way out from Bow and Stratford and Leytonstone to come up here on their days off. The Liebridge route was linked to the LCC trams at Clapton in 1908, but the Rising Sun was still separated, so a change of tram was needed to continue to the Napier Arms. And here is the Leyton tram in the foreground with the Walthamstow tram behind. Connections with Walthamstow were slow to develop, but this was partly because Leyton was not impressed with the Walthamstow trams, which didn't have roofs. A section of this track was uncovered a couple of years ago when the road junction at Whipps Cross was rebuilt with a new bus station. I took this picture in December 2017. The site foreman talked about how firm and solid the tram track is and how it provides a very solid base, so it's still there underneath the new roadway. Motor buses were beginning to appear in the early 1900s, but it was some time before they were reliable. The Liebridge tramways ran a horse bus service from Walthamstow to Stratford and other services in the Forest Gate and Plaistow area. There was a legal case in London in 1900 where bus operators prosecuted tram operators for running buses as they had no powers to do so. So the tram companies separated themselves from their bus operations, and in 1906 the Great Eastern London Motor Omnibus Company was formed to run these services and became a pioneer of motor buses with routes from Leyton and Upton Park into and across central London. They ran a range of Arrol Johnson and Straker Squire buses, and here is one of them outside their offices in bank buildings at the Baker's Arms. And this is their Leyton depot on the Liebridge Road alongside the Gospel Oak Barking railway line. Great Eastern ran services from Leyton Baker's Arms to Oxford Circus and the Elephant and Castle. Here at Clapton, we have their bus on its way to Oxford Circus, with the London General Horse Bus at its terminus and an LCC horse tram which will continue to Stamford Hill. So the Great Eastern bus provides the longest route without needing a change. The Leyton tram at that time only ran into Clapton, though it was soon linked through to the LCC tracks. Now this spot here, of course, is the junction between the Liebridge Road and the Upper Clapton Road, and nowadays this is a huge roundabout with the terminus of the Route 38 buses in the middle of it. The other Great Eastern centre was at Upton Park, from where they ran into Oxford Circus, and here is one of their buses at Great Castle Street, just near Oxford Circus. The Great Eastern held out for a long time against the LGOC takeover, but agreement was reached in 1911. Great Eastern had, in the meantime, acquired land at Leyton Green for a larger garage, and on takeover by the LGOC, this became Leyton Garage, which is still there now. Their Upton Park depot became the LGOC Forest Gate Garage, which eventually closed in 1960. The Leyton to Elephant and Castle route, which I've mentioned, was then operated by the LGOC, who gave it the number 35. The other key route was the 38, which ran from Victoria to Leyton and then on to Chingford, or as the 38A to Loughton. The LGOC had also merged with the London Motor Omnibus Company, Vanguard, who had opened a motorbus works just off Ferry Lane, Walthamstow, in 1906. And this became the Associated Equipment Company, better known as AEC. They had been working to develop a reliable motorbus and in 1910 produced the B-type, of which over 5,000 were produced, and it was produced at Black Horse Road in Walthamstow. The works expanded dramatically in the following years and exported all over the world from Walthamstow until it outgrew the site and moved to Southall around 1929. Here it is next to the Black Horse Road junction, where Black Horse Road station of the Underground is now, in the bottom right-hand corner. The road to the left goes off across the River Lee, Ferry Lane going towards Tottenham. The road to the right is Forest Road leading up to Walthamstow, and the road going northeast from there is Black Horse Lane, which runs up to the Crooked Billet. And here are B-type chassis leaving the works to go to the bodybuilders. The reliability of the B-type led to huge expansion across London and to outlying areas for leisure travel. Trams have not been permitted at Woodford, but the LGOC filled the gap, and here is a 38 at Woodford Castle about to return to Victoria Station. This World War I map shows the weekend routes into the forest. Motor buses could now reach High Beach, Epping, Leyton, Woodford Bridge and Lambourne End. The picture on the right is at Woodford Wells, shown on the map, where the Leyton route took the right-hand fork, while buses on the Epping Road continued on the left. Another point to notice on the map, on the left-hand side, is that buses to the Royal Forest Hotel did come down the steep Chingford Mount, but they didn't go up it. This was a very steep hill, and the northbound buses went eastwards to Chingford Hatch and then turned north along a gentler road. And here is a bus on the 111 to High Beach at the Robin Hood pub, which is still there, and the picture shows day trippers milling around High Beach, a bus to Epping Town in front, and another returning to the Elephant on the right. And this is the Wake Arms, which continued as a summer weekend destination for many years. The bus on the right is heading back to Finsbury Park. And here is Epping with another B-type and a poster advertising the service. I have a suggestion for our chairman that perhaps when we can go out again, we could revive this sort of outing with a study tour of early bus turning points on the Epping Road. It would be a pleasant trip on a summer Sunday and would give very many opportunities for refreshments along the way. And here is one of my favourite posters. The homeward way in the cool of the day, with a bus returning through the twilight, taking everyone back to town. The late afternoon scene is at Woodford Wells again, with buses and cyclists returning from their day out. Then came the First World War. During that time, women conductors, clippies, were introduced in London for the first time. And here are a group of women conductors at the LGOC garage at Leyton in 1916. When the troops returned home, the men took back their former occupations, and all the women conductors had been dismissed by 1919. Here we are again at the Baker's Arms from a card posted in 1919. Though it is probably an earlier picture. The tram is going to Moorgate as the tracks at Clapton have now been connected, and there is a through service with the London County Council, and the streets are very busy. When I look at this picture, I think of my great-grandfather, who lived in the streets southwest of here and had his builder's yard in the railway arches northwest of here, so he probably walked through this junction twice a day at this time. There is a family story that he and his sons invented the breeze block. When you look this up, you find that many people claim to have invented the breeze block, but no one registered this, and I'm not aware of a family fortune resulting from it. Anyway, using breeze blocks, they secured some lucrative contracts from Walthamstow Council to build houses. The quick building allowed them to undercut other builders' prices. One Saturday, a gang of these angry builders descended on the yard to smash up all the equipment there. One of the young grandsons who was on site rushed off to round up his uncles, the Torode brothers, who quickly got there and saved the day. Well, after that, after World War I, the trams were in a poor state and Leyton were having difficulty maintaining the system. As a result, in 1921, the LCC took over the management, maintenance and operation of the Leyton trams, but Leyton retained ownership and relayed the track. The LCC improved the through services to London with newer electric trams, and in 1931, Leyton itself added 50 new trams to LCC design. Walthamstow considered a similar move, but instead set about modernising their system with double tracks and some new tramcars. They also added a few second-hand trams and later modern bogie trams at the beginning of the 1930s. The London County Council ran the Central School of Art in Holborn and used students there to produce publicity posters, including advertising tram services in this area. These are from around 1922, with an excellent map showing services to the forest. And then we've got the Rising Sun along the top with the yellow and blue routes running to it. We've got Ilford Broadway down the right-hand side with the red route running to it, and trams going up the green route, which would have gone up towards Chingford, but not quite as far as the Royal Forest Hotel, because they were never extended up Chingford Mount. These were advertising Whip's Cross and the Rising Sun area, which was perhaps the most attractive scenery on the whole of the London tram system. Whip's Cross was an important spot at weekends and holidays. Here's a busy holiday scene with large numbers of people who got there by tram and are now looking for another one to take them home. They're all in their Sunday best, and the small boy to the left of the horse trough is carrying a large boat that he's been sailing on the ponds. There were boats to hire on the ponds, and there still are, and on the plain nearby there are swinging boats and other amusements. You can see the importance of this spot from the messages on the back of the postcards. This is a very busy crossing where trams and buses meet from all parts of London. This is one of the gates to the forest and is quite close to our house. There's a lovely, large and very pretty boating lake just through the trees. And as I say, it's still there. This is the Rising Sun again. Lots of people came here too, just a little further into the forest. Everybody has to go off the tram here and perhaps catch the further tram up to the Navy Arms. On the other hand, the buses continue through. And there's a 38 bus which is carrying on further towards maybe to Leyton or towards Epping. The Rising Sun and the Navy Arms were eventually linked from the 5th of March 1931 when the track was relaid. Buses continued to develop in the 1920s, both the LGOC Combine and other operators. Here was the Baker's Arms with busy tram services and now the B-type bus competing with them, more expensive but travelling further into the heart of London and to Victoria, whilst the trams provided for intensive short-distance journeys and stops on the edge of the city. The route that I've mentioned several times, from Elephant Castle to Clapton, was now the LGOC 35 route, and it was gradually extended, reaching Wood Street in 1912. Here it is in the 1920s at the Duke's Head terminus in Wood Street. It ran from Leabridge Road up Shernall Street and then alongside the railway to Wood Street. This gives me an excuse to show a picture of my other great uncle's shop in Shernall Street in the early 1920s, right next to the northbound bus stop. My grandfather, who was a sign writer with the shop next to Leicester Square Tube Station, probably painted that sign above the window. One day I'll find a picture of a 1920s bus next to the shop, but I haven't found one yet. In 1921, the 35 route was extended to Hydes Park, where I live now. It terminated at Hydes Park Station for the next 47 years, with later extensions beyond to Chingford Hatch and the Royal Forest Hotel. It ran all the way via London Bridge and the Elephant Castle to Clapham Common. In the summers of 1922 to 4, it was extended from Clapham Common via Barnes to Kew Green, pulled back to Clapham Common for the winter. In 1923-4, it was just extended at weekends. This June 1922 bus map shows a through service every 10 minutes, taking 2 3/4 hours for 1 8p. And there you can see it running from Hydes Park right up at the top there, down through Walthamstow, down the southwest, down the Leabridge Road towards Clapton and Hackney, towards Dalston, then heading south to go through the city and across London Bridge, eventually going through Camberwell and Clapham and Richmond to Kew Gardens. You'd have to be quite hardy to do this on a bus with solid tyres, slatted wooden seats and no roof. This fine LGOC poster from May 1923 shows all the routes crossing London Bridge at the time. The poster lists all the northern destinations, including Hydes Park across the top, and the southern destinations, including Clapham and Kew across the bottom. These routes in total needing 451 buses to operate them. There were road developments as well. The North Circular Road was opened in stages in the 1920s. This was the Lee Valley Viaduct across the marshes from Edmonton to Walthamstow Crooked Billet, with its grand gateway. It was opened in 1927 and then extended onwards along Wallen Road towards Woodford in 1930. The General retained its dominance, and here we are at Leyton again, where buses terminated at the Crown. We have a 10A to the Elephant Castle and a 38B to Victoria Station. But notice another bus on the left of the picture. It doesn't look like a General and is probably an independent operator, a pirate. It took time for services to build up after World War I, and a former taxi driver started an independent bus company, the Chocolate Express. These pirate operators, as the General called them, expanded rapidly, and by the end of 1924 there were 180 companies with 500 buses across London. Here are a couple of pirates at the Royal Forest Hotel at Chingford. They are Dennis buses run by the Reliance Company working on the 511, which ran down through Chingford, Walthamstow and Leyton to Stratford. And here is a later picture from 1932 of a Reliance Leyland on the 511 at the Baker's Arms around 1932. On the left is an LCC tram running north to Chingford Mount, and a Walthamstow E1 tram in the background on Route 57 running from Chingford to Liverpool Street. Apparently there are 16 pirates running on Route 511, competing with trams for most of the journey, and here are a few of them run by Reliance, Pro Bono Publico and Gordon. There was also the development of coach services to the seaside for day trips and longer holidays, a notable operator here being the City Coach Company, who ran a service from Kentish Town and Wood Green to Southend. This picture at the Black Horse Road Junction is for the end of the 1920s, with their Leyland line heading east in Forest Road, Walthamstow, by the Royal Standard, where Black Horse Road Underground Station now is. In the far distance is the Walthamstow tram running from the ferry boat into the Napier Arms at Woodford. In the late 1920s, as I mentioned earlier, AEC outgrew their Walthamstow factory and moved to Southall, and the factory for sale signs behind the bus are at those works by now empty. You could just see a break in the road surface behind the bus, which is where a railway siding ran into the AEC factory from the Tottenham and Forest Gate Railway, which runs parallel to Forest Road to the left of the picture, and is now the Gospel Oak barking line of the London Overground. London Transport took over in 1933 and inherited a huge fleet of buses, trams, trolleybuses and underground trains, and set about creating an enhanced and coordinated service with them while developing standards and style for the infrastructure. Here is the eastbound stop for buses and coaches at the Baker's Arms. The tram is at its own stop right up at the junction. Notice the lady in the fur coat, probably waiting for a green line to Woodford or at Leyton, and the inspectors chatting next to the building on the left. The London-wide system map is in the shelter, and that bank on the corner is now run by Barclays. However, Walthamstow residents were put out that the new powerful bogie trams which their council had bought for the through services to London were taken away by London Transport to improve the service on the Hertford Road to Enfield, and they were replaced by older, slower trams in Walthamstow, whose residents were still paying for them through the rates. LT quickly decided to get rid of the trams and replace them with trolleybuses. So here is a reminder of one of the long local routes, the 61, which was the last tram route to run through Leyton. This is a 1934 scene in Whitechapel High Street. The one on the right seems to be heading into Aldgate with its blind already changed for the return journey. There's another 61 tram at the head of the vehicles in the other direction. At Mile End, there was a changeover pit from the conduit to the overhead, where the plough was taken out and the trolley put up on the overhead wires. The tram then continued from Mile End to Bow and on to Stratford and to Leytonstone. Leytonstone High Road had a single track section. The left-hand tram was waiting for the other one to come through, and in the meantime the bus cannot get past. On the right-hand picture, cars are squeezing through. I suppose this is an example of where other road users complained about trams holding up the traffic. Turning north alongside Whipps Cross, again an attractive spot with trams on their own reservation. And this is a race between the tram and the bus. I hope the cyclist gets out of the way quickly. It was a very fast section for the trams. And indeed, this road is still an attractive spot today, with rather more traffic, but still a place for leisure and exercise. We've seen the Whipps Cross Junction with crowds of people earlier, and here we are in London Transport days. This is where a new bus station has recently been built, and from here the 61 turned west again down the Lea Bridge Road to terminate in this siding at Baker's Arms, looking westwards. There's a 35 bus heading from Clacton Common in the other direction, and a row of eastbound trams coming towards us. If you turn east at the same spot, here are some 81 trams running to and from Woodford Napier Arms. There are also cyclists and motorcyclists on roads which are very quiet by today's standards. And here we are at Woodford, where the Forest Road route was converted first to trolleybuses in 1936 and gave a new link across the marshes to the routes in Tottenham. So until 1939, both trams and trolleybuses terminated here. Once again, the people of Woodford rejected the proposal to extend the trolleybuses to Woodford Green, supported by their MP Winston Churchill. So the trolleybuses had a new turning circle taken out of a piece of forest land. It is still there, now occupied by the car dealership over the road. Heading south again, there was a parting of the ways at the junction with Forest Road when the trolleybuses headed due west. Passenger journeys rose when tram routes were converted to trolleybus, and they created new links that had not been there with the trams. Across the Tottenham, as I mentioned, around Billet Road to the Chingford Road, and in Leyton southwards from Markhouse Road. And London had the largest trolleybus fleet in the world when the system was converted. The Royal Forest Hotel, only ever served by motor buses, continued to be a major destination for services here at Bank Holiday in May 1939, with huge crowds who've been out in the forest, across the plains and through the woods, and are now waiting for a bus home again. And so we come to World War II, where once again clippers were recruited to help run the buses and the trams and the trolleybuses. Walthamstow Carriage suffered some bomb damage, seen being cleared up here, and here's a trolleybus on the 697 at the Bell Junction running down to the docks. It has the restricted headlights and the white painted wings that apply to vehicles during the war for the blackout. The significant thing about this picture is that it was taken on the 7th of September 1940, and that night the Blitz started in East London and the docks. So this trolleybus is setting off from Chingford and Walthamstow down through Leyton and Stratford to the docks on the day that evening the Blitz started and changed the look of the docks forevermore. After the war, London began to recover, and here we are again at the Royal Forest Hotel with utility double-deckers and pre-war six-wheelers, together with a couple of squaddies and people out for a walk. They were getting the service back up to scratch with new buses, and shortly the RT buses began to arrive as well. A happier scene here, obviously a weekend or holiday after the war, with a range of buses to take people to their various destinations. London Transport now came within the British Transport Commission, and an immediate effect of this was that new buses intended for other companies within the group were diverted to London to speed up replacement of worn-out buses that had survived the war. So here was a Bristol intended for Hanson Dorset, working on the 144 at Ilford, before setting off through Walthamstow to Turnpike Lane. Behind is one of the new RTs, with the first colour scheme of cream around the windows and the restricted destination display that they had immediately after the war. The City Coach Company that I mentioned earlier invested strongly in new vehicles after the war and had a very busy period taking people from North London to Southend. Here is a new double-decker and also a fine three-axle coach to allow a longer vehicle until the law was changed, allowing 30-foot single-deckers when that second axle was removed. But City sold out to the British Transport Commission and the route became an Eastern National operation. And Eastern National then also had Wood Green Depot, which later became famous in the On the Buses television series. I shall allow myself another little diversion here, because after the war, another of my great uncles took over a motor garage in Leyton High Road, and this was the Ferry Service Garage. They had been involved in motor racing at Brooklands before the war and were also skilled metal bashers. So they developed a name for themselves locally for the Bentley, Fraser, Nash and other racing cars they owned and worked on. The garage is still there as a jet filling station. My cousin, the son of one of the partners, was given a half-scale racing car one Christmas, his pride and joy. And I'm told that this is now at the Motor Museum at Brooklands, though I have not seen it there myself. The trolleybuses provided the bulk of bus services throughout the 50s, together with the RTs, which are by now everywhere. Here we are again at the Baker's Arms, around 1958, with a 555 to Bloomsbury and RTs on the 35 and 38. That 38 driver hasn't changed his destination line. Again, the Woodford route provided the most photogenic shots in London, and here is a 625 on the last part of its journey to the Napier Arms. And here is the Woodford turning circle in later days. This terminal had 20 trolleybuses an hour in the evening peak in 1958, 10 on the 623 and 10 on the 581, plus more 625s from Beacon Tree Avenue, the first stop in Forest Road. And here we are again, passing the rising sun on the Woodford New Road, no longer a terminal point, just a through stop on a far stretch of road. At the end of the 1950s, LT set about replacing the trolleybuses with diesel buses saying it would improve manoeuvrability. The trolleys from Holborn to Chingford were replaced by a more frequent service on the 38. Here is the Royal Forest Hotel again, full of RTs, with a new RM and the LT mobile canteen. What a shame that the trolley buses never ran up to Chingford Mount or made it to this point. Route masters replaced trolley buses in most cases, here with the 123 and 275 buses, which replaced those on Forest Road. In the left-hand picture, the roadworks for the M11 are in progress, creating 2 flyovers at this spot. Walthamstow was now a bus garage running RTs and RMs. While electric buses were replaced by diesel, steam trains were replaced by electric on the Chingford line in 1960. Here's a steam train to Chingford, climbing the gradient to Bethnal Green, and a new electric train crossing the marshes between Clapton and Walthamstow. And a further development in electric transport was a new Victoria line in 1968. The original plan was for it to continue to Wood Street, but this was cut back to Walthamstow Central, Hoe Street, at a later stage. It would have been a high-level interchange station with a Chingford line, but some of those tunnels still extend towards Wood Street from Walthamstow Central, and you can park trains in them. We are now coming to recent memory, of course. Walthamstow Bus Station was created by closing off Selborne Road with the long bus station, which is intended to be short-term, but lasted around 20 years, when a new bus station was built and the road reopened to through traffic. The bus station had a banjo turn at the bottom, and every bus had to go down there to turn before driving back to the top. The Royal Forest Hotel terminus was replaced by a new bus station at Chingford Station from September 1968. The bus services that accompanied the Victoria line were part of the reshaping plan of the 1960s and radically changed the routes to make them more local and to provide feeders to the Victoria line, encouraging passengers to make their longer journeys by train rather than bus. Here is the Walthamstow W21 single-decker at Chingford Mount in 1968 with a flat fare of 5p. This replaced part of the 35 route which was cut back to Hackney. There is still the 69 long-distance RM behind and still a Green Line coach stop. These single-deckers, of course, proved unreliable and were replaced by DMS fleet lines. Here are 2 of them on the W21 276 at Walthamstow Dog Track. There is now a housing estate, but the fascia is still there with its illuminated sign. The drive to convert to OPO continued and brought the end of crew buses on all but the busiest central London bus routes. Here are Stafford Acro Carriage marking the end of route masters on the 22 route. This led to the end of conductor-operated RMs on local routes. Here's the 69 at Chingford Mount in its final days at the beginning of 1985. The 38 continued with route masters for many years. Here is a Forest District RML just setting out for Victoria from Leyton before it was cut back to Clapton in 1990 because of congestion on the Leebury Road. I did my driving on these buses on the 38 many years ago. This is a stop where no one can see you until you come around the corner on the right, and a crowd of passengers surges forwards, delighted to see you arriving. The 38 had been one of the first routes to receive RTs in 1949 and ran with them for over 21 years, and then with route masters for the next 34 years, and it was one of the last routes with route masters in 2005. The Eastern National 251 service to Southend, taken over from City Coaches, continued to run from Wood Green until June 1981, when it was cut back to Walthamstow and operated with one-person double-deckers and survived in that form for a few more years till 2000. So here's one of their FLF low-deckers running on the 251 across Ferry Lane towards Wood Green, and a later picture of a Bristol VR one-person operated double-decker coming down from Walthamstow Central. And then we come to competitive tendering and privatisation. Leyton Carriage was an early victim, actually outside the London boundary and unable to compete with other operators in the area. And London Forest, smaller than other London bus subsidiaries and with many routes already tendered, couldn't match London Transport paying conditions with the need to compete with new competitors. So a bright and colourful period resulted. Green and yellow Eastern National buses, which later became grey and green. Capital City Bus won a huge tranche of the local services and intended a new yellow colour scheme, but were stymied by the LT publicity department, who put out leaflets declaring blue and silver buses. So they had to start in blue and change to yellow a little later. There was a major innovation on Route 212 in 1992, when the very first use of contactless smart cards by passengers on UK public transport took place. This needed a small self-contained route with dedicated drivers and buses to test it out with regular passengers. As project manager, I knew the route, and Leon Daniels at Capital City Bus running the route was fully committed and helpful too with the process. It was a successful test and was a starting point from which the Oyster card developed, and London Transport's adoption of contactless car payments led to their wider use generally. And so we come up to date. Bus and train use continue to grow in the new century with innovations in the vehicles and services. We have new route masters and hybrid buses. We have new trains on the Victoria line offering a 90-second service in the peaks and the night tube. We have new electric trains on the Chingford line, which is now run by Riva Rail London for the overground. And we have battery electric double-deckers on the 212 and other services. There have been continuing positive developments under Transport for London until the sudden changes brought by COVID-19, which was so clearly discussed with us by Roger French a few weeks ago. So thank you for joining me. As I said earlier, I hope this might be an encouragement to others to do something similar for their corner of London. And while I'm here, if you have other historic pictures of this area that would add to what I've shown, please do get in touch with the friends. It may be that we could put together a book and help raise some funds for the museum. I want to thank several people for pictures used here. John Laker, John Parkin, John Reed, the London Transport Museum, and indeed other people that we've tried to identify but have not always been possible. So my apologies if I have left you out. And so, to end, I mentioned that some locations have been regularly photographed over the years. So let's go out in style with 19 pictures taken of the same spot at the Baker's Arms over a period of 120 years. Look out for the bank building on the right in every shot, while we have a quick review from horse trams to new route masters. Thanks again for joining us, and stay safe.
Roger, that was excellent. Thank you very much indeed. You've covered an amazing amount of ground in the time you had available to you. And what a remarkable set of photographs. I particularly like the one of the lane crossing the railway, which later became the North Circular Road. And your family connections really brought it all to life. To those watching, if you have got pictures that you think would add to Roger's collection, then do please get in touch. And if you think you could talk about your corner of London, then again, let us know. You can do that either by contacting us through the website or through the contact details, which are in the Friends News magazine. Before I close, can I remind you, please, if you haven't done so already, to support the museum's appeal to keep the museum functioning after its loss of revenue during its temporary closure. The details of that should be on the screen as I speak. My thanks again to Roger, to you for watching, and join us again, please, soon for another in our presentations from home.